welcome everyone. I'm so glad to see you again with one of the top events that we have on calendar after the summer. My name is Edwige Nayens. I'm the chair of European Women on Boards. This is an event that we have posted on LinkedIn, so we have many members of European Women on Boards, but we have a number of guests and hopefully they will enjoy the event. We have a couple of men as well joining, so that's absolutely fabulous. We have the pleasure to have Robert Baker that I will introduce in a minute, but let me tell that Kristen Anderson is here as well, our vice chair. Kristen, you say hello.
Hello everyone, good to see you all.
Absolutely. And then we have two moderators, like always, Robert, just to keep us focused. We have Zana Aston. Zana.
Hello, good evening.
And we have Tamara Tankovic. Tamara, you say hello. Okay, thank you so much.
Good evening, everyone.
Thank you. So, Robert.
Hello, everyone.
Robert, I know that you are a celebrity, but even celebrities are introduced, isn't it? So you have many, many titles, and you have even all your titles on LinkedIn. So that's already one lesson we can learn from you. You are a leader, a speaker, an executive coach, a mentor, a consultant. You have 40 years global HR consultancy experience, and you have been the International Diversity and Inclusion practice leader at Mercer for many, many years. And most importantly, you joined the board of European Women on Boards, and this will be your first meeting this week with us. And so we thought you can't refuse anything, isn't it? Why not ask you to come and say why actually you are such a precious and unbelievable person. You gave us the title, why you are really that male ally and champion in gender diversity. So without further ado, it would be really nice to, of course, ask you to present yourself a little bit and say what I have forgotten, if any, and explain a little bit in my first question. You have so much experience in the topics that we have said. Please introduce yourself, and then you can also share what has changed in those 40 years, 4 decades, in terms of women participation in leadership position and on boards. And so I would like to invite all people in the room. Please write your questions in the chat. We have 30 minutes, very interactive interview myself with Robert. We have the two moderators looking at your questions in the chat, and so your voice will be heard in the next 30 minutes. So Robert, what else would you say about yourself, and what changed actually in those 40 years?
Well, thanks, Hedvige, and it's really lovely to be with you all this afternoon, and looking forward to a great discussion. I'd actually like to start with a bit of a thought experiment, if I may. I would like to ask you all to close your eyes for a minute, and I can see you on the camera, so I can see if you're closing your eyes or not. And I want you to dream and think about a world where we have gender equality, where we have gender balance, where we have equal proportions of women on boards and in executive teams, where at home we have equal sharing of responsibilities, where our children are growing up thinking whether they're boys or girls or whatever gender, that they have all possibilities and opportunities open to them. I'd like you to think about that gender balance, that gender equal world. And I'd like you to pop into the chat maybe just one word or two words that come to your mind, how you feel about being in that world where, you know, we haven't got to struggle anymore to get the messages across about gender equality, where we haven't got to wait 200 years to get there, where we've actually got there. What would be going through your mind? What would you be thinking? What would you be feeling? Just one word in the chat, or a couple of words if you can manage them. If you'd like to open your eyes now, and if you finish dreaming about that wonderful world. Here we've got some good ones already. I see peace, for example, relaxed, longing coming, freedom and balance, joy and pride, natural, unlimited opportunities, yeah, free time. I love it, you know. But you know, isn't this wonderful? I mean, this is the world that we want to create together. And you know, why I'm here is I want to be part of creating that world with you. And of course, please keep them coming, because we'll come back at the end. I'd really like to capture all of these. to say, look, here's what we'd all be feeling if we could get to where we want to get to. Okay, I think that's fantastic. But Hedvig, to answer your question, really, I mean, the introduction was fantastic, and there's probably not much more to say other than I've been a long time passionate supporter of diversity and inclusion and gender equality. And really kind of what I noticed when I first started work 40 years ago, coming into a consulting firm straight out of university, was actually how few women there were in consulting in senior positions at the top. It was a very male-dominated environment, as you probably can imagine. We did a lot of work over boozy lunches and, you know, golf courses, sporting events. I mean, and spent a lot of time down the pub and that kind of thing. I mean, that was the kind of world that I started work in. But of course, I'd been at university with really smart women. And I thought, well, where are all these really smart women that I was at university with? You know, why aren't they in consulting? You know, what are they doing? Well, obviously there were some trying to work their way through. But what I found is a lot of those women had decided to go into professions and sectors actually that maybe supported them better, as it were, or offered opportunities that they enjoyed more. So things like, for example, working in social services or education. My wife at the time went into education. I went into consulting, you know, interesting choices that we made. Or, you know, some women went into HR, for example, etc. So it was really interesting, you know, like, why were we making those choices? And what was the world that we were going into then? And it was one where people worked really hard. They traveled, you know, constantly. It was really, to be honest, a world that was, you know, I'm sure set up by men for men to succeed. And I think it was challenging for women to really succeed in that environment, or even for any of us to be happy. I certainly thought, hang on a minute, this doesn't seem right to me. So that's how I got started on this journey, thinking, you know, like, so where are the women, basically? And, you know, like, how do we get an environment where women come through to a greater extent? So that's why, for example, I helped get the Women's Network set up at Mercer, because that was very important to me. And then that's how I got invited to be part of a Women's Network, PWN, that's global. So basically, you know, what I saw over those 40 years in consulting was things start to change. We were getting more women coming through into senior positions. We were getting more men who actually also wanted a bit more flexibility. So I think that was good for everybody. And of course, what I also saw was how good women were at leadership. And I was thinking, you know, wow, how come companies haven't really discovered that? I mean, there were some fantastic, and there still are some fantastic women leaders. I worked with Lena Nair, for example, HR director at HR. She's now the CEO of Chanel. What a fantastic career she's had. And then Beatrice Farrow at Pfizer, Catherine McGregor at NG. There's a lot of discussion, of course, about the pandemic and how women did better in the pandemic. So I started to see that really now we were getting, in more recent times, much more recognition of women in leadership positions, women on boards. And of course, as you know, in the UK, we had a voluntary sort of setup, as it were, in terms of making progress. And we have seen some progress in the UK. Obviously, other countries have introduced quotas. I think in general, we've seen progress, Hedvig, across boards and leadership positions, but I think there's still more to do. I still don't see enough women in P&L positions. I still don't see enough women on the executive teams in the really kind of the roles that really command, you know, the huge amount of the company resources, etc. But I think that's changing. I think companies are realizing that. So what we've now got to do is get companies to start walking the walk. They're talking the talk about wanting more women at the top and women on their boards. They've now got to start walking the walk. So sorry, it's a long answer to your question, but I have seen a lot of change. It's all positive in that sense, you know, that we've got more women now in executive positions and on boards, but I think there's still much more to do and so much more to go for.
Okay, now I'm going to tease you a little bit, Robert, and take you off script. I'm going to ask you the question that I get all the time. So, Robert, you managed to have such a nice career, isn't it? And while you had 2 kids, so how did you do to have such a great career while having kids? And what was the moment of reckoning that not only you were a father, but also became a male ally? So how did you do all that?
Well, it was part of that recognition that actually what happened to me was, sadly, I got divorced when the kids were relatively young. I wanted to be a very active father and play a role in their upbringing. And my son, I had 2 children, they're now in their 30s, a daughter who's teaching, but my son is on the autistic spectrum. He has Asperger's syndrome. So there were lots of issues that we had around his education, getting support from him from the educational authorities. We had lots of meetings to go to, etc. So yeah, I had to start embracing all of that. I wanted to start embracing all of those and be a part of what was going on with Stefan, for example. So basically what I did was I found ways to juggle my workload so that I could be at those meetings with the educational authorities or the schools and still get the work done. So I was fortunate I didn't have to ask permission too much because I still got the work done. But for me, it was really important that I showed up at these school meetings and it wasn't just, oh, Dad can't make it, he's at work kind of thing, because I think that would have given the wrong message to my children, etc. So basically I didn't particularly ask permission. I kind of just made sure I got my work done. But it was a bit strange sometimes because I'd take my children to school in the mornings and I was the only father at the gates, that all the rest there were dropping off the kids with mums. And that was a bit of a weird thing at times. But basically I thought it was very important to do it. And I found a way to do it basically. So maybe that was my privilege and my luck, but that was how I came at it, Hedvige.
Thank you so much, Robert. And there's something else that you shared in another podcast, because of course, gender is the thing that we discuss today, but you have so many things that can differentiate one person, one talent from another. For example, for me, it was the education of the family background. And you shared that as well, that you came from a workers' class, if you can still talk about such a word, but still, so as you have been sharing already, at some point, you had the chance to study, but you had to overcome also a so-called barrier. And how did that influence that sensitivity that you had to what it is to overcome barrier and to move from one world to another? Can you share something about that?
Well, yes, absolutely. I mean, I think we are starting to talk a lot more now about social mobility as another area of diversity and inclusion, that we want to see more socially mobile opportunities, if you like. I know, for example, that companies like PwC, for example, have just said, we're going to drop our requirement for a certain level of degree so that we can be more broad in our acceptance. I was lucky because I was the first person in my family, which, as you quite correctly said, was a working class family, to go to university. I was lucky enough to get a full maintenance grant and education grant from our municipality. So I, in a sense, went for free to university, but I wouldn't have gone otherwise. But when I got to university, what I realized that most of the other young adults there had come from more privileged backgrounds. They were more middle class, if you want to put it this way. Their parents were solicitors, you know, or professions where they could probably afford to send them to good schools and then come on to university. So yeah, I felt a little bit, out of a fish out of water in a sense when I first arrived at the university. I had to work out how to adapt, and that was my experience of being, if you like, the other, of being in the minority. And I think that was a very powerful experience, which I then took into work. And then I thought, well, hang on a minute, I'm kind of in the majority now at work, but what about the people that aren't here, that could be here? Because it was very male dominated, it was very white, if you like, in consulting. And yet I felt there were so many talents that were missing that we could have embraced. So my background played a huge role, I think, also in why I'm so passionate about this today.
Thank you so much, Robert. And then we've been talking about diversity, and your example, I think, resonates a lot with many of the persons in this room. I think you've been very vocal, saying that diversity is one thing. So invite other people, make sure that that there is diversity in the room, diversity in the workplace. But then it will not necessarily be a success. So what are then the challenges for organization to move from diversity to inclusion? So perhaps you can say what the difference is and what are the challenges and how to overcome them.
No, absolutely. And I think, inclusion is something that companies talk a lot about, but I mean, what do we mean by inclusion and how do we achieve it? That's kind of the real critical questions. And I think companies really need to think through to create inclusion. They've got to really create an inclusive culture, and they've got to understand what it takes to create an inclusive culture. And that's one where employees feel valued no matter what their background or their identities, where they feel sort of empowered and trusted and listened to. They feel they belong. They feel psychologically safe okay, to be able to say, look, I'm a bit different to other people that work here, or I have different views. So I think companies need to really understand that that's the kind of environment that they need to create if they want to be inclusive. And then, of course, what they've got to do is they've got to get their leaders to understand what it takes, and their leaders committed to providing the environment where diverse groups of employees can actually work together sort of happily and achieve success. And that I think requires that leaders acknowledge their own biases, their own stereotypes, and they go through some kind of awareness training and some basically some training to help them understand what it means to be inclusive, so that they can then start to bring in policies in the company which then drive more inclusion. Because, for example, you can't have an inclusive company where you still have all the policies and the procedures geared up for men, for example, or geared up for white men. You know, so it really companies have got to understand what inclusion is, and then of course you've got to think, well, how do we then measure it? How do we measure our progress towards a more inclusive state? So that all these things that they've got to think through and make sure they're creating the right environment for people of all backgrounds, because I think, again, what we know is inclusive teams perform better, inclusive companies perform better. So there's a real, very strong business case, if you like. But you know, it's interesting. We've got to get, as someone's saying in the chat right now, we've got to see policies changing, but we've also got to see behaviors changing. And people look at leaders. The leaders at the top have to change their behaviors. So if the leaders are not working flexibly, if the leaders are assuming that you've got to be in the office, you know, to be seen, if the leaders are traveling 24/7, you know, that's what people see as the model of success. And it's interesting, you know, I don't know if there's anybody on the call from Goldman Sachs, but Goldman Sachs was really in the news recently about the hours that they want their employees to put in and the pressures that there are there. So, you know, how do you then deal in that environment with the fact you want to get more diverse talent, you want to get people who might want to work a bit more flexibly? You know, so how do you solve that equation? So yeah, so I think inclusion is definitely the thing that companies are starting to say they want to address. But going back to this point about talking the talk, they've also got to walk the walk, and that means they've got to start thinking about, well, what would it take for us to become more inclusive in our organization, and how do we get there?
Another question perhaps that many of us have. We all know that it's important to have male allies. We managed actually to ask you, and you said yes. So how is it difficult for you to get other men becoming male allies, and how do you do it? What can we learn from that? And second, you have been coaching many leaders. What is this? Is it high on their agenda? How do you manage to explain it? So what can we learn from you? How do you do it yourself, Robert, asking others to join? And what about the leaders you coach?
Well, the first thing actually was I only got into this whole world because a woman asked me to get involved. So Mary Jo Boss, who was the president of PWN Global, said to me, I would like you to join the board of our women's network, to be the man on the board, to get other men engaged in gender equality. So she had the foresight to know that a women's network, if it was really going to achieve change, had to include men, had to be more gender balanced in its approach. And that was a very interesting environment for me, because obviously going in, I'm sure many of you on the call have been like the only woman in the room, right? And the only woman in a meeting. Here was I, the only man, surrounded by 12 super smart, capable women, feeling very much out of his depth, to be honest. But, you know, it was a fantastic learning experience for me. But it wouldn't have happened had a woman not invited me to be part of that. So the first thing I would say is, if you want to get men engaged in this, we've got to invite men in, and then create an environment where they feel, you know, reasonably comfortable. So, for example, I know that there are obviously very important women's issues to discuss, but there are also issues that affect all of us that men are interested in, like career development, like how we achieve diversity and inclusion. So maybe what we do is we have an agenda that thinks about what they might be looking for as well, and then we invite them in. And Mercer was actually very successful. We called our women's network The Vine. So actually it was gender neutral term. We invited men along. We had topics that were kind of gender neutral in a way, and we had some really good discussions. So I think that's the first thing. You know, you invite men in, and then of course my job then is to get more men engaged, and that's a challenge because obviously not all men want to be engaged. I'm very lucky. I know a lot of men that are already engaged, but it can be hard sometimes to get new men engaged because they fear, that they're going to be held to account, or they fear they're going to be criticized. And there's all sorts of reasons why men don't naturally necessarily engage in this. But I think, again, if we can talk about what's in it for them to engage, and one of the things I'm doing at the moment is I'm running a survey which is going to go to men that have participated in gender equality. And the survey is asking them what benefits they've seen in their own personal lives and in their own business lives from engaging in gender equality. And then we're going to compile that survey, and we're going to share the results as a way of encouraging other men to get involved, because they'll see that, well, there are already these guys out there getting all these wonderful benefits from engaging in it. So that can encourage them to engage more too. So I think we've got that work on the go to reach out to men and get them more engaged. I think many men do want to engage, but a lot of them are fearful about how to do it and saying the wrong thing and all the rest of it. I think we just have to create an environment where that's a bit less intimidating in a sense for them. The second thing you asked me was about coaching, really, and about how to really kind of, if you like, bring about that coaching. I mean, what I've done when I've coached men is I've really looked with them at the skills that they need to be inclusive leaders in the companies that they're going to be working in. And I've said, if you want to be a male agent of change who's driving gender balance in your company, let's discuss the kind of things you need to do. And then let's discuss how you find fitting that into your day job. And actually, it really shouldn't be fitted into your job. In a sense, it's part of what you're doing in business, basically. So it's discussing with men how they can show up to be allies and to be agents of change. And some of that simple stuff, like mentoring a woman or being reverse mentored by a woman, it can be that they're talking to their teams about the importance of this. It can be that they're asking for the data that they need in their divisions, etc. So, the coaching bit is really important, I think, because you can put men through all the workshops about this and why it's so important and what to do, but then they've got to do it in the day job, and that's where I think the coaching comes in. And I think what the coaching shows me is that if you put men through workshops, that's one thing, but the company needs to support that with all the rest of it. Like the communication needs to go out to say, we're doing this program, it's really important, and this is for the good of everyone in the company, so that people know what's happening and why. So there's a number of things that need to happen, but I think the coaching is kind of very helpful. All of the men that I've coached so far have gone into it a little bit, like, what's this about? But actually come out saying, it was very helpful because it helped them see what they could be doing to really put being an agent of change into practice.
Thank you, Robert. I still have one question for you, and then it will be over to the Zoom meeting room. So put on your questions if you have some last question. Robert, something that a lot of women and men perhaps struggle with in this room is how to use LinkedIn to brand yourself, to create an image. And you are absolutely fabulous in this. I've seen how many posts you do, how much you use LinkedIn to explain what you do, to spread the word, to really also give visibility to others and to really make your point known. And so, Robert, how do you do it? How many hours do you work? Do you work at night? Do you have secrets? So please, and how do you make it fun for yourself? Because lots of women hate it. So what is your secret, Robert?
Well, I think it actually is to have fun, because if you're not having fun, you're not motivated to do it. I mean, obviously, as you said, I could spend my time doing all sorts of other things, but I find it really enjoyable to connect with people on LinkedIn, to start conversations with new people, to hear from them and hear their perspectives, etc. But here's a good one. So, for example, for International Women's Day, I don't know if any of you saw this, but I've got a 7-year-old niece, Lucy, and I thought, wouldn't it be fun for International Women's Day if we both did a break the bias pose? So I don't know if you saw my post, but I did my pose like that. I got Lucy, age 7, to do her pose. But somehow we took a picture of her that was like, she had the most amazing expression on her face of enthusiasm. And so that was real fun to do. But what happened was that got, I'm thinking about 30,000 views and likes, because basically it was the most ever I had on LinkedIn, because it was personal, because people saw it was fun. They saw that, I was talking about, future generations of women coming into the workplace, having all sorts of opportunities. Lucy was the embodiment of that. And I kind of described that in my post. So I think basically I've got a natural desire to communicate, basically. And I think when I think about, how can I make a difference in the world, I think one of the things I can do is I can communicate some of the ideas that I have and others have and share them, and see if you can just create a few aha moments for people. And I think what I try and do with my LinkedIn posts is just connect stuff for people, create some aha moments, create a bit of humor, because that I think always engages. And but I'm still learning. Obviously, I'm in some senses still a novice. But what I'm doing is I'm just saying, oh, that would be interesting to do a post on that. Let's just do a post on that. And but I think recognizing that whenever I've been to a conference or after an event like this, I'm going to invite all of you to link in with me, for example, on LinkedIn afterwards. That's how you grow your network. And some people might say, well, that's a bit indiscriminate. Why are you doing it like that? Well, surely you should only link in with people that you really know. Of course, there are different ways of approaching this. But what I say is, if I want to have the impact that I want to have, then I've got to be prepared to kind of take this slightly more, mass communication approach. And, I found that's really, really useful. So, for example, when I joined the board of EWOB, we posted about it. We had thousands and thousands and thousands of views because basically I already had a big network and you've got a big network too. And together we expanded our message. We got it out there. And that's really what it is. So I would say, just be relentless. Personally, I would say, be relentless in connecting with people, be bold about getting your message out there, and just think of ways to make it fun and maybe sometimes a bit personal as well, so that people can really engage with, with what you're saying.
Yes, and what Robert did very well, if I may unveil this, is when he said yes to join our board. He asked, "This is what I would like to post about my new position. Is it okay for you?" So that's just wonderful. So not only is Robert very good at explaining what he's going to do, but he's very sensitive not to create a faux pas. And when he's saying what he's going to do in an organization, he checks on beforehand whether the narrative is right. So thank you so much, Robert. Zana, let me turn to you for a first question or set of questions.
Good evening. We had a really active audience. Thank you very much, everyone. So I don't want to miss anyone's question. However, I do feel that we have potentially answered some already. So if I combine maybe two that are similar, Robert, would that be okay?
Yeah, go ahead.
And then stop at the third one that's slightly different. So Sylvia is asking what we need to do in society that we have more men supporting women inclusion. And Christina is asking what is going through the mind and how the conversation look like in a male-only board prior to having a woman joining in, and what needs to happen for male colleagues to be looking forward to have more female colleagues on board. And Zainab is saying it's hard to voice gender biases when we face them, as they are usually so intangible. Any advice how to do this in the most productive way possible?
Wow, there's a lot of questions in there. It's kind of really interesting, I think, that to see, kind of what people are thinking about and focusing on. I mean, certainly I have presented to male-only boards. I did that a few months ago to the board, an executive team of a global engineering company. And it was really interesting. It's not often I get to present completely to all male boards, as it were, but I mean, it was interesting that there was a degree of, so how is a woman going to come in, going to change how we run our board meetings? How is it going to change the conversation? How it's going to change the dynamic? We're going to have to be now more polite with each other. We can't have so many jokes. You could already see that there were some men thinking, God, things are going to change, and not always in their view for the best. However, what I presented to them was all the opportunities that having a woman, and not just one woman, by the way, but certainly more than one woman, to get up to sort of 30 or 40%, was to say, actually, what women are bringing here is a different perspective on your business, a different perspective on opportunities, a bit different perspective on risk, a lot of different skills that they're bringing. As a board, how could you ignore the opportunity to do that? But I think a lot of the issues come from individual men wondering, how have I got to change personally, and how have I got to react now to this? And so part of my job is to try and persuade them actually that it's worth making those changes. It's worth them thinking about their privileges, their biases, their assumptions, But you know, a lot of executives, especially male executives, don't find it easy to be challenged, you know, or don't find it easy to admit that they don't know or they feel uncomfortable. And I think that coming back to this thing about how we get more men to think about this, you know, certainly what I do often when I start this is talk about what's happening in the world of, you know, for example, their customer base is changing. So often you see now there's a real business reason why they need to start looking on their board and in their executive teams like their customers, that actually some of this really good talent, especially in some of the newer areas like technology, you know, you need to have a more diverse talent base for that. So you need to start looking a bit more like that as a board and a leadership team. And of course, you know, that society is now starting to hold companies more to account, that they look more like the communities they serve. So you've got to start thinking along these lines. And you know, there are some executives that totally get it and want to get ahead of the game. They even see it as a competitive advantage in their sector to do it. But some are more reluctant, some are more traditional, some worry that the whole world's going to change, you know, if they start having women on boards, etc. But you know, the direction of travel is only one way. The train is going in the direction of, you know, more diversity on boards, and if they're not on the train, they're going to get left behind, basically. So that's kind of how I come at that a bit. But I may not have answered all the questions you had in there. So if there's one I missed out, please tell me again.
Perhaps Tamara can continue.
Sorry, did you say for me to continue? Or Tamara?
Yes, sure. So no, yes. So I think this ties into what you've just been talking about, and you have mentioned it a bit. But basically, many organizations talk a lot about diversity and inclusion, but they don't walk the talk. So how do we hold them accountable to action?
And it's a question.
And that's from Zeynep.
Question from Zeynep. Okay.
Okay. Well, that's really interesting, isn't it? Because like,
yes.
Yeah. So who holds them accountable, I suppose, is the question. I mean, what we're seeing, if it's a B2C kind of business, is the customers are increasingly starting to hold companies to account, and society's holding some of those companies to account if they're not doing the right thing. But I think what we need to see really is that boards are taking this seriously, that the boards realize that their executive teams have got to be more diverse. The shareholders certainly are getting more interested in this. So, for example, there are a number of very big investment firms now that will only invest in companies that have more diversity on their boards. So that's a very powerful, you know, way of holding them to account. You know, but ultimately, what we've got to have is a situation where they set up a proper set of targets, where individual leaders and managers are held to account for those targets, that their performance against those targets is actually assessed. Maybe, for example, also their bonuses and their ratings get linked to how they're performing on that. So there are probably multiple ways of holding companies to account. And I think, you know, we just got to have more of that discussion. What do they say? What gets measured gets managed. So we've got to make sure that we are measuring how these companies are becoming more inclusive. And there's a number of ways, of course, we can do that. So, yeah, I think, you know, it's time, as you said, to end the walking the walk, and it's time to get companies talking the talk, and so walking the walk, and it's just basically up to a variety of different stakeholders to do that.
Anna, are you ready to ask the next question, please?
So Wanda is mentioning policies and how to be implemented. Also, she's saying that what should companies do to ensure that during the recruitment process, they have a wide variety of candidates. And Rose is commenting that even that when companies do change policies, they do not really change the behavior. Yeah.
Well, I think, you know, that's an interesting point, isn't it? That you need the behavior to change as well as the policies. And that's where, for example, if the leaders are setting the tone and they are saying, look, here are our values as an organization, this is our culture as an organization, then they need to see that people are, you know, supporting that with their behaviors. But it is challenging. I mean, I'm working with a global company at the moment which wants to get to 50-50 in leadership positions. But, you know, some of the hiring managers, for example, aren't making that easy because they're not necessarily searching, thoroughly, if you like, for female candidates. And sometimes that's because they're going very fast, and they say, oh well, actually it's going to take too long for us to search for women candidates, and the time to hire is longer than we would like. And of course, you can do things about that. Certainly, for example, if you're working with a headhunting firm, you can brief the headhunting firm about the kind of process, the kind of candidates you want. And then, of course, you can also look at the role descriptions and say, are we putting out there roles that are attractive to women? Are they structured in a way that are attractive to diverse talent? Are they flexible, for example, in how the work can be done? Maybe some of them could be job shared, for example. It's just thinking creatively of ways in which you can get the work done, which don't bar certain groups of people from wanting to apply for those roles. And then, of course, when you have the selection interviews, you need a proper panel, a diverse panel. Interviewing people, you need objective criteria to interview them against. I mean, there's a lot of good ways you can debias the recruitment process, but you not only have to debias the recruitment process. Once somebody joins you, you've then got to have an inclusive environment for them to feel that they want to stay working in your organization, and that they can develop and be promoted and develop their career in your organization. So you need promotion criteria and performance management criteria that are more inclusive too. So there's a whole set of things that you need to do, which are part of the policies, if you like. But I agree, you also need to see the behaviors changing. And that's where basically the leaders set the example. The leaders basically say, what behaviors are acceptable, what behaviors are not acceptable. And I think leaders have got to be relentless and say, even if you're performing well, if your behavior is not in line with what we want, then your performance review will suffer, kind of thing. So it's up to leaders to really be role models and to show their managers the kind of behaviors that they need to see so that the company can succeed. And Microsoft, for example, talks about its managers actually caring for their employees. They expect their managers to actually take an interest in their employees and actually care about their welfare, for example. So those are behaviors you'd expect to see in, for example, Microsoft, and other companies and other leaders will be saying, we need to have certain behaviors and policies too. So it starts at the top and needs to be worked through, and there need to be consequences, if you like, for those that are really living the values and aren't behaving in the way that the company needs them to.
Tamara, do you have questions?
Thank you. Yes. So we have a question from Emma and one from Carla, and they kind of tie together, so I'll combine them. But Emma has noticed many behaviors among men on boards who are Gen X or older, and sense that they think the gender thing is done. How can we encourage them to think differently and help them think about attracting younger women into the business? And then on a similar note, Carla said that men often do not see the problem or even are aware that there is one. How do we then create this awareness?
Yeah, well, that's a really great question. And I'll start with the second part of it about men not seeing the problem. So one of the most powerful exercises we did recently with the company I was working with was we did this thing called the Voice of the Women in the company. So we basically did a survey of what do women think about working in this organization. And it was quite surprising, if you like. I think the men, when they got the survey back, the male leaders were quite surprised at how the women were saying, actually, we still have to see microaggressions in meetings. We're being talked over. We're being expected to take notes, make the coffee. It's amazing in the 21st century that is still sort of happening. But what was really powerful there was getting the voice of the women, in front of male leaders to say, this is the problem, okay? And if you don't acknowledge the problem, you're going to lose these women because actually they're saying they're not happy with the current working environment. So I think that's the first thing. It's bringing that issue right in front of the men so that they can't ignore it. And then I think, I mean, there's a big discussion as has the gender thing been done? I heard the phrase gender fatigue a couple of years ago, that companies are fatigued about all the focus on gender. Well, of course, the data shows that we're not done and we're not where we need to be. So what I found is very powerful is putting the data in front of a bunch of executives and saying, look, here's your company. Here's how it looks from a gender and other diverse perspectives, and you're not where you need to be, basically, because your competitors are in a better place, or the rest of business is in a better place. So I think putting the data in front of them means that they can't deny it. It also then gives them something that they need to use as a base to work from. Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting to get younger women in to a management team, for example. You know, that's really about those men opening up to the possibilities that can bring, and that's where reverse mentoring, for example, comes in. I mean, I'm reverse mentored, if you want to call it that. I just call it mentoring, but I'm mentored by a millennial woman, and that's really interesting for me because I'm a baby boomer being mentored by a millennial woman, and I get to really see how she sees my actions and performance through her eyes, and it's quite, I learn a lot from her, and I learn also, therefore, what she can bring into business as well, and it's tremendous. So I think in some cases we've got to try and encourage some of this cross mentoring, if you want to call it that, across generations and genders, because I think that really helps bring out these perspectives and helps break down some of these stereotypes that exist.
No, thank you, Robert. So I personally feel what we can do is to try to make the change, do whatever we can to promote sort of inclusivity and diversion. But Angela is saying I'm a headhunter, and on the one side, I get asked to present female profiles, and then I just hear on the other side, well, it doesn't fit really.
Yes.
She's saying I've heard it 5 years ago as well as today.
Yeah, and that's interesting, isn't it? Because I think if you really want to make change in an organization, you've got to be a bit more flexible. You've got to think out of the box, right? Again, I think there's not enough thinking out of the box about, so what are the characteristics, the skills, the experiences we really need for someone to do this job? And I was talking to a headhunter the other day that worked in the engineering sector, who said he came across a woman candidate for an engineering role, and actually she got into engineering. He was surprised at her CV to see how she got into engineering, because it wasn't the traditional route. And yet here she was, a very strong candidate for this role. And I think what that was about just being a bit more open to saying, look, good candidates for roles can come from a lot of different places. So stop thinking that there's a very narrow definition of what experiences you need, what qualifications you need. Sort of open up to what competencies do you need, if you like, to do this role, and just be more open to the kind of candidates that could fulfill it. But that, of course, requires hiring managers to be brave. It requires headhunters to be brave, and to be bold and to push that a bit. But I think that's the way that will come. We just need to be more, kind of more creative, if you like, about how we see work getting done and who does it. And we need to sort of take away some of these artificial restrictions that we've put on over time, so that we do end up having roles and companies that are attractive to a wider group of people.
I believe Angela has raised her hand.
No, but I think it's better to put the question in the chat, please, because otherwise that would lead us too far. Sorry for that. So Zana, please put your question in the chat, Angela, that will be more easy. Zana, please.
Robert, if you don't mind, let's talk a little bit about algorithms, because sometimes when you are looking for a job, when you're already feeling a little bit disheartened, you go to LinkedIn. And Lassie is mentioning something that I already heard, that algorithms are not really going into females' favor when looking for or applying for a job. So Lassie is saying, I was at the webinar on AI, and wrongly it was talking about algorithms being written by white men around jobs and other areas that keeps women and people of color left on the outside. What are your thoughts? Thank you.
Well, I certainly wouldn't deny that exists. Basically, there was a fabulous New York Times article some months ago about the impact of AI and how it could be used for good or for bad, depending on who's basically programming it and how they're programming it. And as you know, oftentimes AI will take its its data set from the past, and then if it projects, it's kind of replicating what's happened in the past. Personally, one of the things I might say might be a bit more controversial is the more women we can get into AI, and hopefully the quicker that will change. But I think we've got to make people that are programming AI more aware of the biases that are coming in and the issues that that creates for people of diverse backgrounds, basically. And this again, I think, is where leadership in an organization can really make it clear that they want to see these processes debiased. I mean, it's an irony in a way that one of the attractions of AI could be that it takes out the human bias in decision making. So you've heard, I'm sure, about the orchestra auditions, where the orchestra auditions and they typically select male musicians, and then they blindfold them, and they still select male musicians because they can hear the women's heels on the floor, etc. And it's that you've got to find ways to get around those biases. And sometimes actually just having AI is a way of taking out that human bias. But obviously, if all you're doing is substituting another set of biases via the algorithm, then that's obviously a problem. So I acknowledge it's a real issue, and I think we've got to be alert to it. I think part of the solution is to get more diversity in who's programming these algorithms. But I think just having that awareness that we need to check and see how they're being, how the data is being prepared, what data sets they're using, what the implications are. We've got to be open to the fact that that might be creating bias. We mustn't just accept that because it comes from a machine, that it can be trusted that it's not biased, because actually, it's often the case that it's got a preset bias in it. So no easy answer, I think, to that one.
Tamara, anything from your side?
Thank you, Robert. We got a question from Susie, more of a statement, but basically we also need to have more open networks between women and men. As we're all aware, most board positions are filled by someone the board already knows. So what are your thoughts about that? Yeah,
well, no, I would certainly agree. I think if I'm looking at a board, I'd be saying, kind of how do we get more inputs into the board that are different inputs into the board. I'm working with the board right now, where, for example, I'm trying to encourage them to have more female board members, because I think it will bring them more diversity of thought. It'll bring them a better experience of their customers, etc. So I think these networks where we can have men and women, well, people of all genders, basically talking about how business can work, how boards can work, I think is a good thing. So I think, yeah, if we can find ways to do that. I certainly found the women's networks that I have been involved with have set up events where we do have that open dialogue, and that's actually very helpful, because then we can understand each other's perspectives. And so I would encourage those open dialogues. I would certainly encourage, and I do encourage, executive teams and boards that I'm involved with to broaden out, be more diverse, get more different perspectives, because I think that's actually helpful for their business. And it's to keep pressing that home, I think, So yeah, I think we should have more open networks for sure.
Thank you. I just saw a very good question. I'm just trying to locate it. I do apologize, but it's about, 1 second, please, sorry about that. From Rosie, do you have a list of best practices for men who want to be active allies?
Yeah, one of the things we do in some of the workshops that we run is we talk about the things that they can do to be better allies to women. And so, I mean, I've already talked about some of those around things like actually mentoring a woman, for example. So find a woman to mentor, find other men to talk to in their organization about what they should be doing to challenge behaviors and practices that they see that are biased, etc., or are discriminating against women. For them to basically ask for the data that they, for their departments, for their companies, so that people can see what the actual situation is. So there's a whole range of practices, and actually maybe Hedvig, one of the things we could do after the call is circulate some of that and then, you know, I'm very happy to share things that I would normally say to a male who wants to be an agent of change. Here are some of the things you should be doing. But I think part of it is not just doing things, it's also assessing themselves for their own biases and their own assumptions. I think often this work really starts with us inside and individually, first of all. Before we start going out there and doing stuff, we've got to think, okay, as I go out there and do things, how am I doing it? What assumptions am I making? What biases am I making? And I think it's still a bit of an aha moment for many men if you talk to them about that male privilege and those biases, because a lot of them haven't always thought about that. So part of what I do in a workshop is often get them to have those moments where they realize that actually they're not necessarily seeing this in an unbiased or an unstereotyped way. And that's actually a very helpful starting point, because then they know once they've worked on themselves, then they are a bit freer to go out there and start doing other things. And some of these best practices can then be done in the right way and have the best impact.
Thank you, Robert. So Tamara, last question, please, for you to raise.
Yes, thank you. So we got a question from Angela, which is, which differences have you perceived between the Anglo-American culture world and the German one towards inclusivity?
Wow, that's really, really interesting. I mean, I think one of the things to certainly acknowledge is that there are quite big cultural differences in societies about where they are with diversity, equity, and inclusion. So, I mean, the US has obviously been, you know, exposed to this for a long time. A lot of the conversation in the US now, there's been a lot of conversation about gender. Obviously, there's a huge amount of conversation going on now about ethnicity, etc., and probably more so than, for example, in the UK or other parts of Europe. I mean, some societies also are a bit more traditional in terms of how the roles of women and men are seen. And I mean, I'm not an expert on German culture, but you know what I have seen is maybe there's a bit more of a narrower definition of, you know, what men should be doing, what women should be doing, and you know, whether women should work if they've had kids and all that kind of stuff. You know, because all those things come into it. So I think, you know, there are these differences. I mean, German companies I've talked to, I think, are aware that they do need to change, that there's perhaps a bit too much rigidity in the way that they have, you know, set out roles and the way that work can get done. I think there's more scope there for flexibility, for example. Yeah, you know, I think there are very significant differences, which, you know, but then I think also we've got to recognize that, you know, Italian culture has a different set of cultural preferences. Spanish culture, for example, Dutch culture. It's kind of really interesting. I think we need to understand the cultures we're operating in, because those will then bring to the fore those assumptions that are made in the society about the roles of men and women, and it's that we need to understand if we're going to try and, you know, create change in that environment.
Thank you so much, Robert. So let me wrap up as we are approaching the end of this hour, which is fascinating. So please, ladies, we have a storyteller amongst us who is hidden, but she's Chala, and she's going to write a beautiful summary of what was exchanged today. So if there is any question that was left unanswered, we will copy paste the chat towards Robert, because this is so nice. And so ladies and gentlemen, for those who would feel for it, turn on the video and put on your nicest smile. We're going to take a global picture. If you don't want to be on LinkedIn, you switch off your video. But so please say hello or put your smile on camera, and Chala is going to take a few pictures, because this is such a great opportunity to give a little bit the impression to Robert what it is to be surrounded by so many women and still feel comfortable. As he was saying, he's still feeling very nice. So for all those of you who are a member, you know that we have 2 events like this every month. We have a summary, we have all the comments that can be shared with you. For those of you who are not member yet, feel free to reach out to us Of course, everyone by tonight will be linked to Robert Baker, that we know already. Feel free to of course reach out to myself or to Kristen as well. And if you want to know more about European Women on Boards, of course you can have 30 minutes chat coaching with somebody of the board just for free to see what we are doing in practice. So thank you so much for coming, and please write one word or one sentence in the chat what you will remember forever from what Robert says, or something you would like to share, so that we can take your ideas in the chat. Thank you so much, ladies. And so one of the advantages of being a member is that at each event you can ask to be invited to a private lounge. So ladies, of course, no chance anymore because the lounge is full already, but once you're a member, you can subscribe to a private lounge with our guest. So Chala will tell me who is going to stay on screen to ask a number of personal questions, of private questions, extra questions to Robert. And so Robert very kindly will stay in the room for more, so 30 more minutes. We have plenty more events. We have a couple of workshops on the 20th of September, 5th of October. We are also moving from capital to capital. We were in Prague last week, Kristen and I, Zana was there as well. We will be in Frankfurt end of the month. And of course, ladies, if you are not convinced it's changing, we have contributed to the Women on Board Directive. And so by mid-2026, 40% of the board members will be female. So it's really a nice time to get engaged. Thank you so much. Have a great evening. See you next time. And so for those who had the chance to sign in, stay in the room, and for the others, see you next time. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you so much. Chala, I hope you have the names. Hello, Chala. Okay, so Robert, you see, you survived, and it was so nice, such a nice atmosphere in the room, isn't it?
No, it's wonderful. I must say, I've always felt pretty comfortable in women's conferences, and I've been at conferences like where sometimes I've been one of the few men or sometimes the only man out there, because in general the atmosphere is supportive and encouraging, and you know, so yeah, this was all that I experienced today. So that's great. I have got to say though, some of the questions are quite tough, and you really got to think on your feet. So that's a bit hard, but you know, what the hell? That's what I expected. So
okay, so Robert,
I'm pleased to be with you now.
Private launch, we always start with the elevator pitch because it's a great opportunity for us to try it out on you and to present ourselves in 1 minute. So my name is Edwige Nayens. I'm the chair of European Women on Boards. I've been in finance my whole life, but also more than 20 years championing gender diversity. And that's the reason why I took on this second role as chair of European Women on Boards, and great to be here with you. Patricia.
Okay, I'm Patricia Gestoso. I'm a technologist with plus of 20 years of experience in digital transformation, and I'm also an inclusion strategist, and I've spearheaded several initiatives in tech about diversity and inclusion that were awarded the UK Tech Changemaker Award in 2020.
Well done.
So, Zeynep?
Hello, Robert. I'm Zeynep, and I'm actually chair of the Individual Memberships and Events Committee for EVOP. And also, I've been in marketing throughout most of my career in multinational organizations, managing P&L and marketing. And currently, I'm a board member in 2 companies, non-executive board director, as well as a marketing consultant.
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah. So Patricia and Zeynep, are there any questions you would like to ask on top, or something that really resonated to you in the discussion? Zeynep, you want to start?
Well, I have been thinking a lot about this point of making our experiences known much more openly, that you also talked about, Robert, for especially gaining male allies, because I believe that people have empathy and understanding to each other if they can see the other's perspective. And maybe we don't talk about what we face often enough. This is kind of the feeling that I've been having for a while. So it was very interesting for me to hear you mention this as well when you were talking. So I would love to talk a little bit more about that. What would be a good way to expose some of what we're going through in a way so as to be constructive and productive, not to be destructive?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we ran an event actually when I was at Mercer called Shattering Stereotypes. And what we did was we invited men and women to the event, and we got the women to go off into one part of the room and talk about all the experiences they had in work. And we had the men go off in another part of the room and talk about all the experiences that they had at work. Then the women reported back what they experienced. And some of these things were like the microaggressions and, you know, the sexist comments and stuff like that, you know. And then the men reported back, actually, and the men were reporting back that they get teased by their male colleagues if they're leaving early to go and take their kids to an event or something like that. Actually, there was some quite powerful statements from some of the men who were defying what you might have expected as the norm, if you like, that actually what we can see is if we listen to the voice of the women and the voice of the men, often we all want change. We want things to be different. We don't want to have this rigidity of how companies look at work and how work gets done, etc. So, you know, it might be a nice thing to do to create an event, firstly, for, you know, for women to talk about their experiences and capture that in some way. But we found it very powerful to have the women and men together, because when we swapped the stories, they could hear each other. And I think there was a huge amount of understanding of each other's positions, you know, when that happened. And I think that helped break down some of the barriers in the company after that event.
Patricia, what do you think?
You know, I wouldn't be with, you know, asking you questions, Robert, the whole day. Thank you very much, you know, but I feel like 2 centimeters taller after listening to you. And my perspective is quite a lot from working in tech. So I just want to caveat that. And, you know, I have 2 questions. One is, what I find in tech often is that the problem are women, because it's the pipeline, because the women. So, and I've been working on this since 2015, where people will tell me in my company, Patricia, this diversity and inclusion is an American thing. I'm based in Manchester. So, you know, I'm coming from there. Okay.
Okay.
So, but I have an initiative with other diversity and inclusion advocates of Accenture, IBM, Siemens, and Microsoft. We are working together in the UK. And this is a thing that comes often. The problem are women, because we don't have the pipeline. So rather than concentrating attrition, which for tech hasn't changed since for decades, is still 45% of women starting in tech drop. Okay, so all that effort in the pipeline goes is still, every time I have this discussion, the men in leadership tell me, Patricia, let's do a STEM careers event. So I'm not saying this is not important, but, you know, it's a leaking bucket. So I would love to have your thoughts about trying to move men from the STEM nice, you know, let's meet girls and, you know, do robots, which I think is nice, but, you know, just get us so far, how we can engage them on the attrition aspect. Yeah,
well, as you said, the attrition aspect is really critical, because if you are losing women at a faster rate than you're hiring them, then you've got an issue. And of course, one of the questions is, you know, why are you losing women in any company, but especially in a tech company? And, you know, it could be many reasons, and I'm sure you've got your views on that. But if you do exit interviews, you should be able to find out what it is that women are finding so challenging in the environment. And from what I've seen, certainly it can be that, you know, the culture is very kind of aggressive. I was talking to a tech leader the other day who said, well, how we run our teams is we beat each other up. Basically, we say like, why haven't you done this? And your quotas haven't been achieved. And they were quite aggressive with each other. And I thought, well, that might work in a male environment, but I think actually, if I was a woman, and even actually as a man, I don't really want that kind of culture. But somehow that kind of bro culture, that kind of, let's be critical of each other and let's be negative about each other is something which I think, that whole working environment, I think, is one that comes up. Then, of course, is it possible to have flexibility? I would have thought in tech, you perfectly can. You can work from home. You don't have to be in the office. I know it's good for collaboration and stuff. But it's understanding, if you like, why are you dropping that 45% of women? Because if you can do things about that, then obviously you're fixing one part of the leaky bucket. But I think the other point, of course, then it comes is how do we get more women into the organization? And of course, there is the longer term view that you do need to get more girls interested in coding and STEM subjects and all that kind of stuff. But that's not going to get you more women tomorrow. So one of the things that I've been challenging companies on is actually you could get women in if you were more flexible in how you interpret the job requirements, if you were more open to the kind of experiences that women could or people could bring into these roles. You just got to be a bit more creative about what you really require in them, and then work, for example, with headhunters who you've briefed in that way, who can bring you candidates you wouldn't otherwise have looked at. So I think, again, a lot of this comes down to being creative about how you're solving a problem. And it's still, I find it a challenge to know why aren't hiring managers more creative about this issue? Because I think if they were, we could go a lot further to recruiting more women into any organization. And of course, it isn't an excuse to say, well, we can't find them in the marketplace. You could probably find enough to fill your company if you had the right policies, if you were attractive to women. So, and it could actually be a competitive advantage that you are one of the tech companies that's a great place to work for women. What's stopping you, kind of thing?
We were in Prague last week, Robert, as we are visiting the different countries, and we were hosted by Avast, which is a company that is developing software for cybersecurity.
Antivirus, right?
Avast. So it's a hugely tech and then cybersecurity, and they have a policy work from anywhere. Right. So that literally means work from anywhere, pre-COVID. And by installing this this flexibility, they moved from 15% ladies in coding to 22%.
Yeah.
They didn't have to do anything else, work from everywhere. And then they went into a merger. They were thinking that we are going to lose a lot of people. They didn't lose one single programmer. So the atmosphere, the culture, the working settings can be a huge difference for talent, isn't it? Yes.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. So perhaps, Robert, in the chat, there is always a little bit like a pessimistic tone as well. Will it ever change? What is happening, etc., etc. So that is something that we get a lot. So I keep saying that we shouldn't just wait until we are asked, isn't it? And you should not just stay in an environment if you really think that nothing is going to change. Still, it is more difficult sometimes to convince women that time is really now, and that the labor market has never been more mobile. So how do you see those things, Robert?
I mean, one of the things that's very interesting to me, and it's a slightly, controversial topic, is what men can learn from women and how they do things, and how women can learn from men and how we do things. And one of the things I noticed when I joined the board of the Women's Network was I asked for a budget straight away when I got my new role. And like nobody had ever asked for a budget before to do anything. So they're going like, hang on a minute, a man's joined our board and already he's asking for a budget, what's going on, and then equally, what I learned was actually, I probably could have got that point across by socializing it a bit better. I was very impressed. I came to learn one of the way that women get things done and decided is they socialize stuff beforehand. They don't just turn up at a meeting and saying, this is such a brilliant idea, they're all going to agree to it. They actually prepare the ground first. And so we learn from each other. And I think one of the things I'm saying really here is that we can learn. I think women could be a little bit more assertive about some of these things. Great example recently, I'm involved with a coaching program. There are 8 coaches, 2 men, 6 women. Guess who are the 2 people that have asked for the highest rates for their coaching capabilities? It's the 2 men, right? Okay. The women just accepted the rate that was given. The 2 men said, actually, that's not enough. We think we're worth more. And, you know, it seems stereotypical to keep saying, why don't women value themselves more? But yeah, men would come at this and say, look, the time is now. I'm going to start asking for more. I'm not happy with what I've got. For some reason, women find it a bit harder to get to that place. So help me out. Why is that?
No, I think you're right. And I think that women value a lot more things. They have a wider variety of things that they value when they accept something or not.
Yeah.
And so if they feel, well, that's a nice company, whatever, then they will feel reluctant to ask something more, or they will take a proposal for an end game, while men like it to negotiate, isn't it? Zeynep, please.
Yeah, I mean, at which I think this point that Robert's raising is very correct for a lot of women. Robert, I think the story behind that is women have to prove themselves their whole lives.
Yeah.
You know, starting from schooling, and you know, somehow to get the same opportunity as men, women have to be even better.
Yeah.
So after a point, it's almost like you start believing the story that somehow so many people tell you that you're not good enough, that maybe we start believing it ourselves. So I think the system is rigged from the start. For women
Right.
to get somewhere, it's so much harder that it's almost like it creates a bit more disbelief in yourself. Whereas for men, it just seems to go a lot smoother, at least from my experience with people around me and my colleagues, etc.
Yeah. Well, obviously, some of that could be socialization, i.e., boys typically brought up to believe they can do anything, and not restricted. Girls sometimes restricted and told that they can only do certain things. I mean, I don't know, but I mean, I think we should all be aware of the impact of socialization and these kind of constraints that we end up placing on ourselves. But what I think is really good when you see a leader that recognizes that actually, if he's getting a woman onto his team, he's getting a man, but better. Do you know what I mean? And because she's had to work so much harder. She's had to prove herself. So I always looked at my female colleagues as wow, it's incredible. I'm working with you. You must be absolutely brilliant. I always start from that point. And normally I'm right as well, because the women are super smart. That's why it was so intimidating joining that board of being the only man on the Women's Network board. It was like, God, these women are super smart. They're super capable. I kind of just got here because I'm a man, So it was really, really interesting to see that. So how we deal with that is an interesting question.
So Ron rejoined, I think, because he lost connection. So you can always ask a last question. So you have a little extra session here, Ron, if you want to appear on screen again. You have to switch on your video if that's possible. But Patricia, please.
Okay. You talk about mentoring. How do we make men to sponsor women?
Wow. Make men sponsor women is an interesting phrase. What I'd like to do is encourage men to feel that they want to be agents of change, that they want to help bring about gender balance in their companies, that they can see the benefit to the company and to themselves as leaders of engaging in this. And one of the things I say to men these days is, look, if you want to be a leader of the future in companies like SAP and companies like Unilever, etc., they want leaders that know how to do this stuff. They want leaders that know how to do gender balance. They want leaders that know how to sponsor women, that know how to mentor them, for example. So, if you don't do this stuff, you're not going to be really, helping your own career. But, I mean, I'm trying to get to a point where I enthuse men that they really want to do it, because I think, they can then see something where they've really helped somebody. I know that when I've done mentoring, certainly, and to some extent sponsorship in the company before, it's one of the most satisfying things when you see somebody develop their career, when you see them take an opportunity you've given them and run with it and convert it, as it were. It is one of the most satisfying things. So I think, I don't think we can force them. I think because that's not going to work. I think we have to engage them, have to show them the advantages of it, show them the real kind of benefits to the company and to them as leaders, and then hopefully they get the message and they say, where do I sign up? You know.
Okay, for me, it's, you know, I've been over mentored to death, like a lot of women, and much less a sponsor. Fine, you know, in general, you know, everybody, oh yeah, I did that, but then no warm introduction, and you know, that can make the difference. So I was, you know, what I was curious is, of course, a sponsor is not something you can just tell people you need to sponsor, but how we can word that so people don't think that mentoring gets the job done, that there is more, you know, putting skin on the game, that really makes change.
Yeah.
happen.
Well, absolutely. Look, I mean, there are a number of different things. Obviously, there's sponsorship, there's mentoring, there's coaching. I mean, each of those can play their roles in different ways. What I'd like to think of is that companies say to their leaders, look, one of the aspects of being a leader in our company is you sponsor a woman, basically. So it's one of your duties as a leader to do that. The point you were making though was, how do you force them to do it? And I think what I'm saying is the best kind of people here are volunteers, people that really want to engage with it. The most effective sponsorship, the most effective mentoring has been when people want to do it. So part of what I spend my time doing is trying to fire up men to want to do this, because it's good for the company, good for the women, and it's good for them. And I think if you can get that message across, then they're much more open to doing it. And so that's great. But where the coaching comes in is, I find that it's often when you coach the men one-on-one that you start to understand what their challenges might be or their reluctances might be of the why sometimes they're not doing this. And you know, you'd be surprised sometimes the reasons that come up why men don't want to engage more in this. But you know, some of them are actually quite fearful of how to have those one-on-one conversations with women, for example.
Patricia, if I want to tease you as well and also give you some comfort, I had a conversation with an executive search firm last week, and he asked me, I have been rebuffed so many times by women when I propose a role. So I said, okay, I'm going to give you 30 minutes coaching whenever you want, how to convince a woman to accept a role. Because very often women say, are you sure? Am I good enough? Perhaps not the time. So, because of course he asks things to women like he would ask a man says yes directly. A woman asked 3 questions. And so he was puzzled by that. So exactly the same thing. You are puzzled. Why is it so difficult to get a sponsor? And he responds, why is it so difficult to get a yes? So sometimes we have questions both ways. So we have Ron Maret, who cannot ask his question by video. He is a partner at Business Basecamp, a Polish guy, and he asks in the chat.
Sorry, I'm Dutch.
Oh, sorry. So Dutch.
I live in Poland.
Okay, you live in Poland.
And the company is based in Barcelona, to make it simple.
Yes, I should have known that Rod is really very Dutch. And so your question is, willing to be a female advocate, being or trying, how do you think I could help best? That's Ron's question.
And basically, that's not to Robert.
Yes.
That's basically the ladies here.
Oh, to the ladies. Oh, you want an answer from a lady. Okay, so Patricia, he wants, Ron would like to help. What can he do?
Okay. Okay, to women. Okay, how many women you have one-to-ones about, what they want in their careers? Because I don't know very much what you want.
Okay, let me explain you a little bit in a nutshell what we do. Business Basecamp is a female-oriented consulting organization, and basically our main offering is a strategic planning tool. And what I noticed a lot of time is that you have to be very careful in how you put things to a female, because somehow they feel very fast sold. And if you are too careful, they don't trust you somehow. So I'm always balancing like, okay, where do I go good and where do I go right? Because with a man, it's very simple for me. Female is way more delicate. And what Edwige already said, and that was for me part of an answer on my question, because that's also something what I'm triggering with outside of my work. If I talk with females about careers and possibilities, and if a guy gets a job offered and he knows it's way over his pay grade and he's basically not ready to do it, he will say yes, no doubt about it. And what Edwige said, a female will come with 3 questions. Are you sure? And they will not go for that. And I think this is also a big issue if you look at gender equality, because you can say to a company, okay, you have to be open to do it, but females also need to make that step and understand the concept that a guy would say yes while they are hesitating. And especially if you sit in front of another guy, he will think, oh, you're not ready for the job, while the guy said, yeah, I can do it.
Yeah.
So how can we change that mindset?
Yeah, I think and perhaps we can have a conversation another time specifically with you, because I think it's extremely helpful. And I also think, Robert, it's what you have been saying of those 2 groups having chances in a comfortable environment, so no competition, no hierarchy, to speak our mind and listen to each other, to better understand what is happening in the room is extremely useful. And to explain it very simple, I've always been in a world where confidence meant you were competent. If you look confident, people will think you are competent. I've learned the hard way, being in banking and risk, that can be very dangerous, because very confident people can be way less competent than you think. So in banking, it's not a good idea. But learning this as a manager, as a leader, as a CEO, as an HR is extremely important. But it's also important for women that they know which language is spoken here, what are the rules of the game. And if they want to adapt, fine. If they don't want to adapt, choose another environment. So Zeynep, please.
Just one quick question, if I may, Zeynep, before you start. I mean, just on that point, one of the things I've seen very effectively done, and it happened at Mercer actually, was that the leadership identified the pipeline of women leaders that they could bring on in the future. And they had conversations with them early before they were going to take on leadership roles about how they would feel about being put forward for a leadership role, what they would feel in order to be ready for it. So actually, they were kind of grooming, if you like, their future women leaders. And the conversation started a couple of years before they really had an opportunity to take that role up. But then when the opportunity came, the women were ready. The women weren't lacking in confidence about the fact that they could do it, because those conversations had all prepared. But what that takes then is an enlightened leadership to know that that's the way to do it, and an environment where that's seen as something that would be welcomed and successful. Sorry, Zeynep, I just wanted to share that because I thought that might be a helpful thing for Ron to think about as well.
Very strong point. Thank you very much for that. It's very helpful. Zeynep, sorry.
Thank you. No problem, Robert. It's great. First of all, I have to say, I think this might be one of the only instances where I have such a candid discussion about gender equality with men, except for one-on-ones. And I'm finding it very refreshing to hear point of view. And this leads me to think, Edwige, maybe we need more of these forums so that we can speak more candidly. So to Ron's point about why women hesitate when taking up a job, I want to bring maybe possibly a controversial perspective. I mean, the reason why we want women in leadership positions is so that they bring a different way of doing things, a different style, and a different leadership type. To be honest, to be aware of one's capability and to be realistic about what one can do and cannot do, to me seems like a good thing, actually. So why are we forcing women to act like men? I mean, if it is a woman's kind of nature to be realistic about her own capability and not oversell herself, maybe that's a good thing. I mean, maybe organizations need to learn from women that overselling yourself is actually not a good thing, and it can bring disaster to an organization's performance.
No, but we have to make sure that the men understand that if you ask 3 questions, it means you are actually interested and committed, and not that you are saying you're not interested. So that kind of knowledge we have to learn from each other to understand the attitude. Patricia, last thing.
Okay, I just wanted to say I coach women in leaders and non-binary people, and how I try, one of the ways I address that is because they begin to think about the others. As you said, it's very complex. The family, the children, everything comes to tell them, you know, think about you rather than everybody else, you know, not this, I'm letting people down. And the thing of not being 100% sure and saying, you know, until you do the job, you will never be 100% sure. What if 70% sure will be enough to try? How that feels for you, 70%. And just put it more as well, like if you don't take this opportunity, who won't be served? What voice won't be told? What story won't be told? What changes won't be made if you are not a leader? So bringing in this, you know, you can be of service, but you're stepping up to others. I think resonates with some people, you know, some women as well.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much. So we are nearing the top of the hour. So Robert, you have been so generous with your time already. So let me thank you. We shouldn't ask why you are on the board. I think we know already. We're so glad to have you. And I hope you're not going to run away by the end of the week, because we really are so fortunate to have you.
No, I enjoyed it immensely, Hedvig. And of course, you know, this is a learning curve for me as well. I'm learning by interacting with all of you. It just enriches my experience. So I'm delighted to have had the opportunity to engage with you all this afternoon.
Yes, and you will get also the whole chat. That's always very nice, interesting lecture, especially that people give so much feedback, and so really nice. Thank you also, Ron, for re-entering the room. That was really delightful.
Thank you.
Gender equality, nearly. So it was nice. Thank you so much, Robert. Unless you want to say something, we can stay in the room. But Zeynep, Patricia, and Ron, have a great evening. Bye.
Thank you so
thank
much.
you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Hi, Hedvig.
Okay, so thank you so much, Robert. Anything you want to say? Well, something we should learn. Was it okay for you?
It was fine. I mean, obviously, I'm hoping that it was of interest and you know, engaging for your audience. Really, that's the kind of key thing.
It was. It was. I don't think you should doubt about that, Robert. It was more that we have so many questions, and also, as Zeynep said, I think it's not often that you have such a candid and open discussion, also with men sharing their thoughts. And you know, we are on Zoom. Can you imagine, Robert?
Yes, I know, and you recorded it too. My God! But no, what was great about it was that actually, you know, I thought about what we were going to talk about, etc. But you know, it was great because early on you got me off script, which was perfect because you know I tend to kind of like go, okay, I've got to know what I'm going to say, you know. And actually, you were perfect because you just look. I relaxed, you know, and I just talked, which was perfect. So thank you for that. Because this is still something I don't find that easy, to be honest with you. I do it because like all these things, I think there's an element of growth that comes from discomfort. So I always do take on things where I don't feel completely comfortable, because I think maybe I'll learn something and maybe I'll grow.
And I can really say, Robert, when you share something personal, you are so convincing and so kind, and so I think Chala can say it. Chala is one of our youngsters, isn't it, Chala? So
yeah, hi Robert.
Hey, how are you?
I'm fine, thank you. I think this was a really great event. I really enjoyed the first part where we wrote in the chat, where we closed our eyes. It was such a breath of fresh air, and I think everyone enjoyed it a lot. So
did everyone do it? Because I couldn't open my eyes to see what everyone was doing.
Everyone did it. I took pictures.
Okay.
Great. So you see, Robert, you are convincing. Thank you.
Well, that's great. Unfortunately, I have to go up on another meeting starting right now.
Bye.
Lovely to see you, and we'll be in touch. Yeah.
Thank
Cheers
you.
then.
Relax.
Okay, bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.